Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you. Good afternoon. I'm Vadim Mironov, head of the business analysis group of Inner Stage, and today we'll be speaking about the role of business analysis in defending the big-scale business assets. For convenience, I will just stop my video and run my presentation, share my screen with you. All right, so this business analysis is considering any IoT project as the company transfer tool from the current state to the target state. There would always be a problem to tackle. This current state would normally not satisfy the business customer. Also, the things related to the IoT security. It could be long processes, high costs, unclear responsibility areas, and IT-related risks. Normally, it is stipulated that the weaknesses have been analyzed and eradicated. As far as the IT-related projects are concerned, the business assets protection ones, especially if we are to protect the customer's assets, we just need to make sure the customer answers a few questions. For example, what's your asset like? What processes this business asset entails? What are the processes used in interaction with it? When we have this information, the IT expert can identify the sources of potential threats. Here we can identify the asset, the business asset. It could be any information in any stage, like electronic documentation or documents on paper documents that are valuable for the customer, which integrity should remain intact for the customer. In order to tackle this problem, also in terms of IT security, you just need to identify this problem. And the problem identification is done with the use of business analysis. But before we start speaking about business analysis tools, we have to make a stipulation here. And this business analysis term is a very widely considered in terms of business and also in terms of information technologies. In terms of business analytics specialist evaluates the business state and its readiness to identify what factors would impact the financial results. And the business analyst sets a goal to provide the company's management some information about, for them to make their appropriate solutions and make the appropriate decisions. And the business analyst is analyzing the processes and making the models of these processes from as is and how they should be like. They have to identify and analyze the customer's needs to come up with appropriate solution for the customer. Also in information security, also in cyber security. I would identify 9 of those, but we'll be tackling just one of them. We'll be modeling the existing forms, but would also run through other ones that are tackled by them. First of all, they identify process design documents. They identify instructions of the users, and they work closely with the customer, because sometimes it's much easier to sit together with the customer and to draw the interface of the possible further solution. What would be the buttons, the logic, and this gives quite a lot of understanding of the functions that these IT solutions need to cover for this particular customer, because the business analyst interacts with the customer quite closely and is considered to be an intermediary between the engineer and the customer. The business analyst sets the instructions because it's them who understand which questions the end user may start having. And also the business analyst would run some glossaries and databases, because their goal is to maintain the information background, which would be equal for everyone. The engineers, the experts on information security should all speak the same language, because if we put different meaning in that, it can negatively affect the results of the project. The next task, which is run by the business analyst, is the change management, having the matrix of these changes, which relates to all of the questions related to the business customers, everything about the changes of the documentation, requirements, changes of the functions. So without that, we wouldn't be able to analyze everything properly in terms of whether it's possible to satisfy this request or not. It can also compare the functions, the processes before and after, and it's the business analyst who comes up with presentations, etc. But together with you, we would be considering our today's topic is the use of the modeling of the business processes in information security and cybersecurity. The main value for the business analyst is visualization. So just need to visualize the item we discuss with different people so that everyone perceives this in a similar fashion. So BMP is used for that, as we have the acronym in Russia, the block charts, flow charts, mock-ups of software, for example. So we have the examples of the software products with the control elements, the fields, the buttons, and examples. Examples are metaphors or successful life stories, examples from the real life implementation by which the analyst can explain everything and illustrate everything. Right in the lower right corner, we have a bottle which is filled up with multicolored bubbles, symbolizing the famous bottleneck. The famous bottleneck when the the whole performance of the process depends on the performance of this notorious bottleneck. For example, everything in your process may be fully automatic and nice and beautiful, but if somewhere in the middle of this process we have the only business analyst who checks through these applications, this analyst would symbolize the bottleneck. So by using this approach, flowcharts, mock-ups, and examples, you would be the intermediary between the customer and IT security. Now let's speak about the business process. Edward Deming, the famous consultant, the common economist, allegedly said, if you cannot imagine your activity in form of a process, you don't know what you really do. I believe this is really so, especially if we take a look at the classic definition of the business process, which is an exact pathway of the interactive activities which would transfer the input resources into the final result, which is valuable for the end user. I have taken this definition because it contains a lot of separate mandatory elements, because, like, for example, saying valuable for the end user, if it results in a product which is not demanded by the end user, this process is very dubious and is very unreasonable. If we don't have the exact order, the exact run of the interconnected activities, we would not be able to identify it exactly. And some input information is necessary, like the documents, electronic messages, the laws, the decrees upon which this business process is running. But in any way, this business process is not existing in vacuum. It is exactly connected, interrelated, and it should have a certain value. Otherwise, there is no point of implementing it. There may be different business processes, and we may take a look at these business processes examples. As an example of a bank, the hierarchy of business processes, not necessarily in a bank, is split into 5 levels. The first level is the class of business processes. Here you can see that they have main business process by the bank. Apart from them, which are targeted at generating profit in the company, they also have supporting business processes and the management processes. These are the 3 big parts of a process groups. Then we identify the direction, for example, the services of legal entities and physical persons. So this is roughly how we split the main processes in an organization. Then we have the end-to-end process, like, for example, loans provided to physical persons. And this is called an end-to-end process, not by chance, because if it's an end-to-end process, it describes all of the stages of this end-to-end process, which start from the very beginning and lasts to the very end. It should be having the phase when the customer only just starts having a need of a certain banking service, and it should end up at a stage when the deal is closed. For example, when the loan is issued, it's not over. We'll just have to have the follow-up process accompanying the customer and then closing the deal. In terms of the analysis of the potential threats of cybersecurity, we speak about the understanding of who is doing what and in which system. And also it's about the interactive processes at the higher level, for example, at the throughput processes, because the owners may be different departments, and we need to realize what would be the business assets that we strive to protect. The hierarchy of all these processes is mentioned at the next slide, but here I would like to say that we have this wooden doll here, Russian doll, not just by chance here, because each next level here provides more detail than the previous one, and it very much resembles a standard wooden doll, Russian wooden doll, a babushka. One of the key tasks for the business analysts is to identify the stakeholders, because it really all depends on the involvement and engagement of all the stakeholders, and some representatives here and some stakeholders may even perceive your project as a threat. For example, if it's all about automation. For example, it can be stipulated that some of the people in some of the department will be considered obsolete, and this party becomes completely disinterested in these new solutions, and you need to bear it in mind. Basically, depending on the level of the business process, depending on the level of the decomposition, the owners of the processes very much differ. It's the board of the directors which is responsible for all of the main business processes of the bank. I'm speaking about main business processes, generating profit. The chairman of the board is responsible for all of them. As for physical persons services, it could be a deputy chairman of the board, and then we cascade it down. And the lower you get in terms of detail as the business analyst, the more low level, shall we put it this way, experts that are familiar with the specifics of their work, you'll have to interact, because normally you just speak about specific activities, specific systems, specific logic. You'll have to contact with the heads of the departments and some key experts working in such departments. Speaking in terms of a more global process, you have to mention the interaction between the more high-tier experts, but most of the time you just work with the heads of the departments and experts working in such departments. EPC Thinking. In my presentation, while I was speaking about modeling the business processes which can help us with IT security, I'm not stopping at the notation of the business modeling. This is the BPMN and DFD, IDF0 and PC and flow charts, whatever. But in actual fact, if we take the notation, it really all depends on the approach in the organization and the individual preferences of the business analyst. But I personally do believe that it's very important to think for this EPC notation. It's important to think about it in a proper way. This notation is one of the more detailed ones. It's both, it's plus and it's minus. The business processes cards makes us answer 6 key questions. The first of them being, what are the actions running in this process framework? If we take a look at this flowchart, you will see that the actions are highlighted with the green boxes. For example, data collection, emails, sending emails from the bank. We basically understand what would be the activities running in the course of action. The second question we just need to address for this EPC thinking approach is the conditions under which these activities are performed. For example, these are the elements entitled events. They show the events under which this or that functions are carried out. And they also fix what is the condition of actually fulfilling the event. If it's after the hexagon, it's the result of the function. It's even process chain EPC, and one event can be both the result of carrying out one function and the resulting event for the next function. And EPC also would like us to answer a few questions about who is going to be the executor, and they do not welcome some vague examples or like dubious executors. We may, of course, assume that, for example, if you use Google Documents, some people can share the same Google document and there would be two executors, but sometimes we need to mention that there would be exact division of the roles. Sometimes they can overlap and run in parallel, but normally one function does not welcome that in business processes. What are the information systems used in carrying out the function? This map would have to address the question, what would be the software tool that would back up the running of the function and the business assets, which we call like that. Here we're speaking about paper, electronic information, which is processed by carrying out the function. If you recall our example from a bank about business assets, for example, the credit applications, transactions, deposits information, everything which is related to the map of the processes realizes that we work with certain processes and the people involved and the people behind it and the tools used by them. And by making a short summary, I would like to say what would be so useful about using this business analysis and cybersecurity projects. There would be 6 of them, and sometimes they would overlap with the items which I voiced. Due to business analysis, the experts, the developers, the testers would have a more complete understanding of the specifics of the business of the customer and the risks involved. We start speaking the same language with the customer and start understanding what's more critical for the customer, and we start understanding what the customer is doing and what would be the goals that they are trying to achieve and what we need to expect by reaching them. Then by collecting the additional analytical information, we identify the parties involved, for example, the executors, the heads of the branches, the owners of the processes, and then we understand who we need to contact to, who is the expert in this or that field, in business field, who is the expert for a specific information system, or who is working with these processes simply, or who will be a consumer of such a process, and who would be the supplier. Number 3 is thanks to the business analysis, we have a certain set of information systems. Thanks to that, we understand what would be the systems utilized, who uses these systems, and in which context, so forth. Then we set up a list of information assets that are used in customers' processes. It may be very necessary because it may affect our evaluation of the threat. For example, a credit application can no longer be a credit application in its life cycle, and it can result into a transaction, into a payment to the customer's account. And by understanding the status of the model, by understanding how this process is changing, we find very good value to understand the general picture in a better way. Number 5 is understanding the conditions and terms at which this or that function is carried out. We understand when this or that function can be carried out, can be performed under which circumstances, and what would be the output. It can relate to occurrence of certain events. It can be the reception of a message from some department or an order from the manager. So we understand what would be the cause and what would be the effect. And finally, this business analysis helps us structure the information about the business processes, which becomes the basis for expert evaluations. I'm almost done, just a couple of more sentences. And the structured information about business processes becomes the basis of expert evaluations of the consequences of the security incidents. It's much more easy to